Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is William Kiley. I'm the organizer of this event. And I'd like to introduce you to Michael Strong. He's going to be your instructor for the evening. Currently, Michael is the co-founder of the Cabelli Strong Incubator in Austin, Texas for grades 6 through 9. He's one of my favorite educators, and he's going to be talking to you about how to give your child an expensive private education for less than $3,000 per year. So if you have any questions or suggested topics that you want to discuss, you can post them below the live stream, and also feel free to take advantage to the chat on the right-hand side, as many of you already are doing. So yeah, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Michael, and hopefully we have a good talk this evening with lots of learning.
Thanks much, Will. Before I get started, I'd like to know how many of you have children and how old your children are, and what you hope to get out of this evening. So if you could go ahead and just chat. There are different issues, obviously, with respect to different ages of children, and I can customize my presentation based on how old the children are. So how old are your children? And if you don't have children, that's fine as well. But often people interested in a program like this are interested because they have parents, because they are parents. So while I'm waiting to get that information, I'll provide some general background. I often describe myself as somebody who loves learning and hates school. I went to regular public schools in Minnesota and then Colorado. And in those schools, I did very well. In my junior year of high school, I had a teacher that offered a discussion class where we simply read philosophy, Plato, Buber, Nietzsche, and we talked about ideas, and I loved it. It was a blast. After doing that, I discovered St. John's College in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where all classes are taught Socratically. I thought this was a blast, and I wanted to go there. It turns out that I had great test scores on the SAT, and so my college counselors in high school advised me to go ahead and apply to the Ivy Leagues. I went to Harvard and found that I was bored silly there, having famous people talk at me. So I transferred back to St. John's and graduated 5 years later. I took a year off to travel through Europe, and simply loved reading and thinking about ideas for 4 years. Went on to graduate school at the University of Chicago, where I ended up studying with, see if I can stop that. Oh, I know what it is. It's my headphones. That should stop it. Ended up studying at the University of Chicago, working on a dissertation under Nobel laureate Gary Becker, economist. From that, I started doing Socratic seminars as the group process discussion that we used at St. John's was described. The basic format is one reads a text and the professor's only role is to ask questions, or the teacher's only role is to ask questions about the text. So I started training teachers to lead Socratic seminars in Chicago public schools in the late 1980s. From there, I got a job training teachers full-time in Alaska to lead Socratic seminars in homework. We were on grant money in Anchorage when the grant money ran out. Some parents asked me to start a private school based on the Socratic method I'd been using. Oh, thank you, Will. 3 people have children age 0 to 5, 1 5 to 10, and 1 age 10 to 15. Excellent, pretty good range. And if more people want to give more information, that's helpful, and I'll keep an eye on it. So I started the Athenaeum School in Anchorage, Alaska, where the faculty and students all did Tai Chi every morning together. We also did a lot of Socratics and Socratic seminars, and then there was a lot of project-based learning. In the meantime, I was asked to join the Judson Montessori School at the time in San Antonio, Texas. And many Montessori educators had seen the Socratic seminar experience that my colleagues and I developed as an appropriate secondary school sequel for Montessori education. Montessori emphasizes highly individualized learning within an environment where children choose their work. The Socratic is more abstract, but it's appropriate therefore for secondary school because students are free to follow and think their own ideas in a fairly open-ended context. So I Socratized, so to speak, the pre-K through 8 Montessori school in San Antonio. While training teachers across the country, I came out with my book, the first book, The Habit of Thought, From Socratic Seminars to Socratic Practice. And that led to a consulting career where I trained thousands of teachers across the country, mostly public schools, but some private schools and parochial schools, in how to lead Socratic seminars in their classrooms. At the time, I was involved in the field of learnable intelligence, where it turns out that there's evidence that by means of the kind of questioning, I'll get more into this more later, one can actually raise the intelligence of one's child and improve cognitive functioning. So this was perceived as a way to really develop the scores and learning capacity of people. At one point in our public school program I developed in Anchorage, the minority females in that class gained 4 years of critical thinking scores in 4 months. The Watson-Glaser critical thinking appraisal, which we use to measure progress, is correlated with both SAT scores and IQ scores. It's a link to The Habit of Thought in my book. And in addition, I started measuring progress based on the College Board SAT. I thought Watson-Glaser critical thinking appraisal is esoteric, nobody has heard of it. And so I would administer the College Board SAT annually from grade 6 onward. And I had cohorts of students. We had 8th graders at a Montessori middle school I later created in Palo Alto, who scored higher. Our average 8th grade student scored higher than the average private school senior in the United States. So I was able to create incredibly high octane, so to speak, cognitive growth in young people by means of these Socratic practice. Again, I'll get into that in a few minutes. After the Judson Montessori to be returned to a sequential series, I created the Winston Academy, a school for highly gifted children in South Florida. We had 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students taking and passing advanced placement courses, College Board advanced placement courses. It was arguably the most academically advanced school in the US at the time. From there, I was recruited to create Montessori middle schools in Palo Alto. That's where we had our average 8th grader scoring more highly than the average college high school senior. And then I created the Moreno Valley High School in Angel Fire, New Mexico, which was in its 3rd year ranked the 36th best public high school in the US. And all of the schools ahead of it were either prosperous suburban high schools or magnet schools. We were in a rural, relatively low income area, and our students took off and performed exceedingly well on the AP tests. After that, I met John Mackey, the CEO of Whole Foods. He and I both believed in entrepreneurial solutions to world problems. He through creating Whole Foods, myself through creating a series of high-performing schools. And so I've spent much of the last 10 years writing, speaking, talking, and developing projects, connecting entrepreneurs related to entrepreneurial solutions to world problems. I have an amazing network of amazing people around the world. And then last year, I reunited with Kotso Cabelli, a man with whom I had been on his board in Austin, Texas from 2004 to 2008. He had left his school. He'd been kicked out of the school he'd founded, and he was therefore available to start another one. So he and I created last fall the Cabelli Strong Incubator, which is designed to be an integrated entrepreneurial incubator plus college prep academic program, where we emphasize Socratic cognitive development on the one hand and real-world entrepreneurial startup skills on the other, because we believe this combination is going to help students be suitably prepared for the 21st century. We started with 33 students last August, ended the year with 40. Just before this call, I was meeting with parents eager to get their children into our school. We're going to be up to about 50, 55 this fall, and probably up to 70 next spring. We see this as a kind of education whose time has come. So I'll just pause there and let people orient a little bit, see if we've got any more news on ages. So I'm going to, because we've got some 3 parents with young children, and then fewer with older. I will start at the very beginning with young children, but in order to do so, I was like, start with the end in mind. A rule whenever I think any of us are doing projects, but certainly with respect to education, I start with the end in mind. And a couple of preliminary remarks. I think to be a great parent or a great educator, rule number one is to believe your child is capable and extraordinary in their own way. I feel as if our job as educators and as parents is to identify the unique genius in our child and help them manifest it as powerfully as possible. It may or may not manifest as mathematics. It may or may not manifest as languages. It may or may not manifest in an academic way at all. It could be they're a creative genius. Pablo Picasso could barely do arithmetic. He turned out okay. Albert Einstein was very slow to read. His teachers, I think today he probably would be put in a special ed class and regarded as, cognitively disadvantaged. But obviously he did okay. I think we need to perceive our children, what they're strong at, and then develop that to an amazing extent, while also paying attention to whatever other characteristics we believe are important for our child's success. And I say we believe because as one figures out how to optimize your child's education, you need to decide as a parent what the boundaries are in terms of what you think is best for your child. Personally, I really don't care about conventional education at all. A lot of the most successful people I've known did not follow conventional educational paths. I believe the value of following a strengths-based approach is so important that I really don't think that one needs to care much about the traditional paths. I will talk about the ways in which you might want to be concerned about the traditional paths, just so you can do a minimalistic set of traditional preparation while creating as much freedom as possible. So with that whole preface in mind, I'm going to go back to starting with the end in mind. And this is the strategy for college admissions that we're using at the Cabelli Strong Incubator. Because homeschoolers have done such a brilliant job at knocking down the doors of college admissions, very, very few colleges these days require a high school diploma at all. Very few colleges really care about, 20 credits, 30 credits, whatever. Forget the credits. What they want, colleges want amazing, amazing young people. The example I like to give is when I went to Harvard, the student with the lowest SAT scores in my entering class had been elected mayor of a small town in Michigan at the age of 18. If your child can get himself elected mayor of a small town at the age of 18, nobody cares about the test scores. Similarly, if he or she can write a software program that sells, if they can create a YouTube channel that it gets a lot of hits, if they write a novel and get it published, if they do something amazing, that matters in college admissions and in life. If you care about getting your child into elite colleges or want the option of giving your child the option of elite college admissions, you will want to develop very high SAT scores in your child, if it's appropriate. Again, depends on the child. I think for some children, there are situations in which parents' ego needs are being met by the development of the child's academic abilities to a very high level. On the other hand, there are some children who it's entirely appropriate to develop them to a high level. So you've got to sort of think about who you are and why you're doing what you're doing with your child. But ultimately, I know as much as anybody about how to raise SAT scores in a big way, and we'll talk about that path. If that path is appropriate for your child, you want to get the SAT scores way up there. Start early. It's much easier than starting late. Then a few advanced placement courses. These are College Board college courses that if a child is scored 1 through 5, if a child scores a 4 or 5, then the elite colleges will pay attention. But you don't need to have 10 AP courses. There are students at big suburban high schools that take 10 AP, 15 AP, completely unnecessary. I know the former director of admissions at Yale. I know the son of a famous director of admissions at Princeton. In both cases, these people say, and I knew somebody who was on Harvard admissions at the committee as well, if they have great SAT scores and a few great AP scores, those are sufficient signals that the child is academically capable. Beyond academic ability, then some kind of amazing real ability is much more important. Likewise, they don't need to have a packed resume in terms of orchestra and student council and volunteer work and varsity sports. Most schools would rather see your child be truly extraordinary in one or two ways than have a resume that's packed. I've been on scholarship committees where I read 300-400 scholarship applications in the morning. You get bored silly seeing orchestra, student council, varsity sports, straight A's, blah, 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 blah. What you want is you want your child to be amazing, stand out, be interesting. One real world case study, a student was applying to Harvard. He had dropped out of high school, gone and joined a Buddhist monastery, came back and finished high school. If nothing else, you're reading application number 375, boom, you remember the kid who dropped out of school to join a Zen Buddhist monastery. Simple as that. So go ahead and support your child's radical individuality and being amazing at a high level. So all of that to sort of hopefully get people to see strengths-based education, identify your child's genius, take it there. For academic options, SAT is the big thing. If a child knows how to read, write, and do math well, basically the SAT is just a reading, writing, math test. If the child has really high reading, writing, math skills, then he or she will do fine in an AP course. So as a consequence, your job as parents, even from a young age, is to develop healthy habits and attitudes, healthy, confident children above all. And then beyond that, let's crank up reading, writing, and math to an extraordinary extent. And that child, if they're confident, happy, healthy, emotionally healthy and well, and they have high-level reading, writing, and math, boom, we can do the SAT, we can do the AP. You've done a strengths-based approach so that they've done projects that show how brilliant they are. They will have amazing life options. And I would frankly say that done right, your child is going to have better options than almost any child from almost any private school, let alone public school. One specific anecdote, Peter Thiel was one of the founders of PayPal, early in LinkedIn and Facebook. Thiel is now a hedge fund billionaire. Thiel, a few years ago, began sponsoring the Thiel Fellows, which were 20 students under the age of 20, each of whom is awarded $100,000 to drop out of college and start a business or not go, as the case may be. The students who win this turn out to be truly extraordinary young people. Most of them are in some sense homeschooled, and most of them are confident young people who've been doing independent projects on their own from, again, a young age. Those sorts of people did not worry about passing 7th grade science. So with that vision in mind, let's talk a little bit, let's start to get more granular in terms of the reading and the writing and the math. I won't talk a lot about the confident holistic, but it is important. I think often school damages children by undermining their confidence. And one of the best things you can do at home is to help make sure your child is confident. So we're talking the 0 to 5, or even if you have a preschool, if you send your child to a preschool, fortunately, most preschools do not damage child self-esteem, but be sure that whatever relationships your child is surrounded with, support your child being happy and well. I've seen all the small schools I've created have attracted kids. At least some percentage of the children who have attended these schools have been damaged, emotionally damaged by their previous school experiences. As in, sometimes when they get into adolescence, especially with girls, they can manifest as various kinds of self-harm, depression, suicidal thoughts. So above all, make sure you raise your child to be confident, healthy, happy human beings. Within that, we'll start with reading and then go to writing and then go to mathematics. So reading, I would say a prerequisite to developing reading skills from a very high level is starting at a young age. First of all, limit what I'll call electronic addictions. One of the things that shocks and horrifies me is that a lot of American homes have television sets in the living room, the kitchen, the bathroom, the bedroom, in the car, everywhere, screens everywhere. That's why I call it electronic addictions. And sometimes it's TV, sometimes it's video games, whatever it is, kids are always plugged in, and adults are often plugged in as passive consumers. If you want your child to be extraordinary, it's most helpful not to develop addictive behaviors vis-a-vis electronics. Those addictive behaviors vis-a-vis electronics will make it more difficult later on for you to transition your child to a life of reading. I often say that arguably the most valuable part of my own education is that I was raised in northern Minnesota in a very rural area where we had very poor television reception. Basically, it was a fuzzy screen with black and white where we worked really hard. We could sort of see some images out there, but it was not a lot of fun. And as a consequence, I read. I became a voracious reader. By the time I was in 6th grade, I was reading a 200-page book every night. To this day, I'm an exceptionally fast reader, and I consume a lot of diverse material. It's just an incredible value. So first thing is minimize screens in your household. It's okay as a family to watch movies together, and there's no reason to be fanatical about it. But I'll give you one data point that's not well known. If one looks in the United States, people are well aware that in international comparisons, American children score poorly on tests. If you only look at those households with 3 or fewer television sets, American students from homes with 3 or fewer television sets score, I think it's the 3rd highest in the world. What brings American average down so dramatically to the point where we're at the middle of the pack among OECD countries are the huge number of households with 3 or more television sets. I think something like 75% of American households have 3 or more television sets. And those households have dramatically lower test scores than do those with 3 or fewer. How could improve American international rankings? Just reduce the number of TV sets in the households. Sad but true. So I probably ranted enough about that. Limit electronic addictions. Your kids, as they get older, they'll go to friends' homes that have lots of screens, whatever. At your home, minimize electronic addictions. The other thing is children are sponges. Everybody's wondering, how do I teach my children? The first is who you are. Ralph Waldo Emerson says, who you are shouts so hard, shouts so loudly, I can barely hear what you're saying. If the parents are readers, the children are much more likely to be readers. When my children were young, I have 2 grown children, one 26 and one 22. My son graduated from Reed with a degree in mathematics, worked for a software developer, worked as a software developer for a startup company. He's been recruited by Microsoft and Apple and Amazon and all the big companies. He started the R Statistics open source package group in Portland. He's now getting a graduate degree in statistics. He'll be able to do whatever he wants. My daughter just graduated from St. John's. She's just figuring out what she wants, but she's happy, confident, can do anything. One of the things that my wife and I did was that we read together in the evenings after dinner. From the time I read aloud to my wife while she was nursing our children. So before even the tiniest bit of consciousness, evening time was reading time. Evening time was family reading time. Every single night. Occasionally something else would be happening, but pretty much every night. So what happened was that when my children were still at the crawling stages, they would be opening books and turning books, and the little kids' books. They couldn't read. They had no idea what was going on, but it was a ritual. As a consequence, my children became readers. They were in the habit of reading in the sense of turning pages and being around books well before they were able to decipher. And this was no pressure, no pushing. So one of the other things is, again, no stress, no anxiety. Don't put your ego needs onto your kids. One of the great insights by Maria Montessori was create a learning environment where learning happens spontaneously. If you curate the learning environment of your home in the right way, minimum screen times, lots of cool, interesting, objects, toys, fun stuff, animals if you can, and then lots of books, and you model the kind of behavior. You're an intellectually curious human being. You have engaged conversations with parents, as parents, and you read around your kids, you read with your kids, your children are much more likely to spontaneously become readers. It's that simple. So you create this immersive environment where your children naturally become readers, and then by the time they're 3 or whatever, at some point they will want you to be asking them to teach them to read. You can also, of course, as you read aloud to them, you start sounding out words and pointing out words. People get all hung up over whole language or phonics. For me, a lot of the debates around education are based on one size fits all model in the public school of strictly whole language or strictly phonics is, I would say, mistaken in both cases. Forget almost everything you hear about educational debates when you're one-on-one with your child, because the fact is, when you're teaching your child to read, yes, you teach them how to sound out words and letters and so forth, and that is basically a phonics-based instruction. And sometimes you talk about context. You read whole things and you read words where they might not know all the letters, and you make it real and alive. That was the original inspiration for whole language reading. You make reading part of your culture and who you are. And so you don't strictly teach phonics in a narrow way. I can't imagine a parent doing that. It would only happen, the whole language thing was reaction to overly narrow phonics, and then the whole language is disastrous. They put phonics back in. Again, almost every educational debate is one extreme and another. As a parent, you simply naturally teach your child to read, and you want to create a warm, enjoyable, fun experience to reading. Your child gets to sit in your lap and cuddle, and you talk, and it's time. My wife used to say, we're now divorced, but I have a lot of respect for this insight, attention is love. And with children, it's absolutely true. Children crave attention, and you want to be giving your child attention for all of the good things. The worst possible situation is when you only give your child attention when they are misbehaving, and you ignore them when they're being good. That's recipe for disaster. What you want is, if you need to correct them, do so quickly without a lot of emotion or distraction, just do it. But when you're doing good things like reading with them, love them, make it a delight. You want them to love reading. You want them to remember the experience of reading with you. You want their fondest memories to be with mom and dad and books and this whole thing. And then if you're talking about ideas, if you're asking them about what you're reading, you want that to be enjoyable. So the more you can create this environment, the more likely you are to launch your child into a pathway of success. So this is still 0 to 5. We're getting young people to the point where they love to read. And basically, I spend so much time on reading because my feeling is that if a child becomes a reader, about 80% of the reading of the educational problem has been solved. I regard reading as that important. When I run a lot of schools, when a child comes in and I ask, do you read? And the child says, oh yeah, I read this and this and this and this and this. Okay, done. This one is easy. It doesn't mean sometimes they have learning disabilities. Sometimes they have a hard time with math. Sometimes they have been emotionally damaged from another school. They still have to learn science or whatever. But if a child is a reader, basically problem solved. Because how do you learn most content? Reading. You can say, oh, 21st century video and so forth. Well, I would say the people with the best jobs in the 21st century are going to be people who still know how to read and write, or the vast majority of them. So if you want to give your child a great education, read. Love reading, lots of reading. Reading is normal, reading is ritual. And then as the child gets a little bit older, you talk about the reading. You ask questions about the reading. And a lot of the questions are warm and inviting. Again, you want the experience to be enjoyable. Never, ever, ever interact with your child around learning where they're getting a negative vibe. You need to be acutely aware of the emotional ambiance, the emotional manifestation of your interactions with your child when you want to engage them in learning. So the way I ask questions with very young children is to explore what the heck is going on in their heads. They're in a totally different universe, and I want to know what's going on in that universe. One of the really fun Socratic discussions, and now as I'm talking about reading, we're kind of getting into the Socratic thing, but a really fun Socratic discussion I've had with, say, 4-year-olds even, is 5-year-olds, a little bit easier, is 4 sentences. And the 4 sentences are, my name is myself, my body is myself, my mind is myself, my soul is myself. Sometimes 4 and 5-year-olds don't know mind or soul. That's okay. Most of them know my name and body. And so whether it's one-on-one or in a group, it's more fun with a group. Even your kids' friends ask which is most true. Most of the time, and it's remarkable, people think, oh, philosophy, older people and so forth. I wonder, what do they think is true? And a lot of times there'll be some students who say, my name is myself, but then they think about that one versus the body, and then they realize, well, so and you can ask them, well, would you still be yourself if you had a different name, or would you be somebody else? They think through that and think, well, I'd probably be myself, so then maybe my body is myself. Then you can go to mind, and so forth. I'm not attached to the term soul. I have no particular beliefs around it, but it becomes an interesting question to get them to think about, what would that mean if you want to go there. So even with young children, you can ask them all sorts of questions. Give you a very different example. At one point, I was reading 2 different kinds of alphabet books with a group of children. One alphabet book said, alligators swim in the rivers, bears climb trees, cats hunt mice, and so forth. The other was along the lines of A is for alligator, B is for bear, C is for cats. And after reading both alphabet books, I asked them, are they both alphabet books? And what was interesting is some students said, yes, of course. Look, alligators, bears, cats, ABC. Other students said, no, 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 no. It has to say A is for alligator, B is for bear. Otherwise, it's not an alphabet book. So the first one cannot be. And then they develop reasons for that. So with all of these sorts of examples, I, as a Socratic questioner, I'm not trying to prove them wrong. I'm not trying to intimidate them. I'm not trying to prove anything at all to them. I just wonder what's going on in that universe. We all used to be 3 or 4 or whatever. Who are these people? How do they see the world? How do they make sense of the world? So with my children and with all the young children I've worked with, and I've done a lot of work with, again, 3 or 4-year-olds. 2 is a little bit young. You can start asking questions, but 3, it becomes a lot more fluid. I try to discover their universe. When I would drive to school with my son, I would ask him, does this look like the same road we took yesterday or not? And I'm not trying to trick him, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I want to try to understand how he's perceiving the world and how he's constructing meaning. There's a whole strand in modern educational theory about how learning is constructing meaning. As a parent, you can do a lot to develop your child's brain by getting them to think metacognitively. Again, fancy big word. It's just get them to think about thinking. So if you ask them, is this the same road we took yesterday or not? They have to kind of, well, is it or not? Simple question. But you're getting the wheels spinning. So I spontaneously would have daily these conversations with my children and the children in my schools. This sort of constant reading and then constant questioning, conversation, thinking about ideas, I call which road. Is this the same road or not? Is this an alphabet book or not? My body is myself. These are all conversations about ideas. You're getting them to assess, weigh, evaluate, think. Those sorts of conversations plus lots of reading will make develop your child to an extraordinary extent. You can start from the age of 3 and pretty much do this sort of thing on up. I'll kind of do a radical version so that you can think, get into the extraordinary endpoint. Even if all you did was your child was a reader and you had great conversations with your child, I think you could do that until the child was 11 or 12, 13, with almost no other education at all, really no other education at all, and your child could turn out to have a spectacular life and do amazing things. Deep, long, thorough reading, thinking, talking is fundamental to everything. And in my belief is most parents are undermining their child's development by sending them to schools where this is not what happens at most schools. Give you one example with my son. At one point, we'd moved to Florida so I could start the Winston Academy. My children, that was a secondary school, my children were still in elementary school. And so my wife and I put our kids in the best public school in Broward County at the time. They had previously been in the Montessori school, which they loved. This school in Broward County, they hated it. We walked in a second week of school, saw the lunchroom, regarded it as abusive, pulled our kids out, and they were unschooled the rest of the year. But I looked at a book called Cartoon History of the Universe by Larry Gonick, G-O-N-I-C-K. And my son started reading the Larry Gonick series. I would say Gonick's Cartoon History of the Universe, which my son read in 2 or 3 days, had a lot more content than the school history textbook. So he could have spent a whole year going through unbelievably boring, meaningless history, which he would not have remembered. It would have taught him that history is boring and that school is a waste of time. Or he could read the fun, silly, kind of outrageous Larry Gonick series, learn a lot of history really quickly, and then he hung out and colored the rest of the time. I don't care. Again, he turned out to be extraordinary. What did we do? We got him to be a great reader. I asked him a lot of questions, got him thinking and so forth. That's all you need. So basically, if you're, this is just so simple. This is why it saddens me that most children go to school and I would say are damaged unnecessarily because they could be learning a lot. So lots of reading, lots of thinking, lots of talking. If your child's school is doing that, fabulous. If they're not, doing it at home. If you feel more comfortable having a tutor do that, that's okay. But I think most parents can learn to support a culture of reading, thinking, and talking. Not a big deal. Writing, next thing, if your child, at some point, you want to teach your child the basics of writing, you could have a tutor for that. Some things, the transition from non-reader to reader is labor intensive. You could have a tutor for that. The transition from non-writing to writing can be labor intensive. You can have a tutor for that. But beyond that, once your child knows basic writing, then just like with reading, provide lots of opportunities to write fun, interesting things, stories. A lot of children love to tell stories, have them writing stories. I'm going to back up a little bit on the storytelling. Reggio Emilia is this fabulous alternative education for preschools founded in Reggio Emilia, Italy. One of the things they do prior to literacy even is they they help children learn how to tell stories visually over many frames. So if you go into a Reggio Emilia classroom, there might be 50 pieces of paper for one story where a 4-year-old drew, one kind of like cartoons. The dragon did this, and then the dragon did that, and then the dragon did this, and then the knight in shining armor did that, and so forth. So they don't even know how to read or write, perhaps, but they're developing the ability to create long narrative trains. And I think that sort of getting them to tell stories visually, even prior to writing, is a powerful way to get them to be creators. So the reading is good in terms of incoming, but now with writing, you're getting them to, create output. Start visually, get them to be fabulous storytellers. Of course, put their stories all over your house, celebrate their stories, listen to their stories, help them develop ever more elaborate and complex stories. When they read and understand stories, you can start talking about, what did the author do and why? And when you tell your story, do you want to do it this way or that way? Get them thinking actively as a creative being trying to figure out how to tell a better story and so forth. But again, lots and lots and lots of this. They should be telling lots of visual stories. Once they learn to write, then get them to tell lots of written stories. So that by the time, again, they're 12 or 13, the more, one sense learning is simple, the more you do, the better you get at it. You know, if you ice skate a lot, you get good at ice skating. If you play chess a lot, you get good at chess. When I look at what you can do, either in a homeschool, unschool environment, or in, say, a alternative school that supports and encourages lots of reading and writing. Malcolm Gladwell famously talked about 10,000 hours to be world class in something. And there have been quibbles about, is that true exactly or not? But practice is important, is true regardless of the 10,000 hours thing. But if your child, say, is spending, say, 5 to 10,000 hours before the age of 13 reading and writing, compare that to a child that goes to school and perhaps has a cumulative amount of, say, 2,000 or 3,000 hours of reading and writing. You know, if they just go to school, do a little bit of reading and writing in school, go home and watch screens. Any kid who reads and writes for 10 to 15,000 hours by the age of 15 is going to be much more developed than a child that writes for 1,000 to 2,000 hours, whatever. You can never do enough. Reading, writing, lots till the age of 13, and it's not that hard. It's fun and easy and creative. And you know, things like punctuation, grammar, spelling. Once your child wants to write, then you can start to introduce more and more of the conventions of English. Once they want to write, at some point they'll want to publish. And what does publishing mean? It can mean a blog. It can mean a letter to grandma. It can mean an email to somebody. It can mean an Amazon book review. Once they're generating prose, then we can talk about, well, just like, you know, you don't want to look funny when you go out in public, and at some age kids get that. You don't want to write funny when you go out in public either when you publish. So once they are churning out lots of prose, you can coach them while they're churning it out, sentence structure and grammar, punctuation, all that. But the real thing is to get them to write so much that they really are motivated to improve it because they have something to say. They want the world to hear it. You know, they want to be impressive. And at that point, it's relatively easy to teach the mechanics. Also, if they've been reading a lot, they will have sophisticated sentence structure. They will have a sense for how colons and semicolons and so forth are used. The more they're a reader, the easier it is to teach the mechanics of writing. One of the most difficult things to teach at the high school level is to teach somebody how to write a sophisticated paragraph if they've never read anything but textbooks. The textbooks have been dumbed down, so they're all banal. And if that's all a child has ever read, plus maybe a few fantasy novels, it's almost impossible to get them to write an excellent analytical essay. They just don't have the prose styles in front of them. So read a ton makes writing easier. Write a ton, tell stories visually, and then write a ton. By the age of 12, 13, or whatever, your child will be a truly extraordinary, world-class reader and writer. Think, talk, read, write, speak. Boom. You need a few tutors to help here and there. Not a big deal. Way less than $3,000 a year. If you can't do it as you know, a single parent or something, if you could possibly form a co-op where you get, you know, 4, 5, 6 parents together who are aligned, and all of you together hire some tutors who are bright, you know, maybe young college grads or maybe retired professionals who love kids, love learning. When I hire teachers, I don't care if they're credentialed. For the most part, I avoid hiring credentialed teachers. Credentialed teachers have been taught to teach. I want interesting human beings for my kids to be around, where the interesting human beings think, talk, read, write, engage, excite, inspire. My number one standard whenever I hire teachers is, do I want my child around that human being? And part of that is intellectual, curious, and active. Beyond that, let's just get whoever can help get the reading, writing, thinking, talking, listening cranked up. So that's the super simple recipe for up till age 13 for everything except mathematics. And I'm going to talk about math now in a little bit. All of this is based on an essay I wrote several years ago called How to Give Your Child Private Education for $3,000 or Less. So I'll give you a link to that. So mathematics is a little bit different. It's different because while there are some students who spontaneously have real love for math, the philosopher Gauss was apparently correcting his father's arithmetic at the age of 3. His father was an accountant or something, and Gauss became one of the world's history's greatest mathematicians. Here's my essay, How to Give Your Child. So, because I'm covering a lot quickly here. So yeah, the number of children who are spontaneously really adept and lovers of mathematics is relatively rare. If your child is that, I would say if you're not very mathematically inclined, so you get them a math tutor, get them a creative, somebody who loves math. Again, forget math teacher. For me, you want somebody who loves math, who thinks mathematically, makes sense of the world mathematically, who loves logic games, and have your mathematically talented child around that kind of person early and as much as possible. If your child is maybe somewhere more on the kind of, I call it a normal spectrum, where they don't have a negative or positive opinion of math necessarily. When your child's very young, you probably don't know. I very much encourage logic games, and really for all children. So certainly chess is a logic game. Checkers is easier for younger children. Go is a very sophisticated logic game. There's a game called Mastermind that younger children can play. Checkers is probably easier than Mastermind. Set is a really fabulous pattern recognition game. There are many sorts of games like that that are designed to get your children to think logically. And I would play them as a family. It's not about competition, except unless it's fun and silly competition. But again, just as with reading and writing, no heaviness, no anger, no ego. You're just a fun family enjoying life. And one of the things you do as a family is you play logic games together. And you think about the best move and how to strategize the best move and that sort of thing. You can also, by the way, do great language games. When they get older, Scrabble and so forth are great. But you want your child to have the experience of thinking about the best move logically to be, just as with reading and writing, a normal part of what the family does. In addition, the one exception to no screen time is I'm a big fan of programming as a way to develop logical thinking skills. The Logo programming language, there are variants of it. You can learn to program logically on the screen. There are also Lego Logo robots where you can program little robots to go all over the kitchen. So very young children, 4 or 5, can program these robots. So it's 4 steps to the right, 6 steps to the left, 10 steps down, and whatever. You can have them do patterns all over the kitchen, the house. So logical programming, logical games, I see those as really important prerequisites to developing mathematical ability. And just as with reading and writing, just part of life. At some point, you may want to get more into mathematics with your child. Again, my perception is there's no rush. If you're providing your child with a really rich environment, you don't need to be in a hurry. Most of school time, it's wasted. And so if you got your child, say, by the age playing lots of logic games and doing logical programming such that their minds were well developed to reason through things, you could start them doing arithmetic as late as 7, 8, 9, 10. The founder of the Sudbury Schools are an alternative school chain, they believe in not teaching children something until they demand to learn it. Larry Greenberg's the founder's name. He tells a story about how he had a group of students who at the age of 12 or so were demanding that they learn mathematics. They'd never had any math before that. And he finally agreed, okay, it sounds like you're serious. And he says, and I think it's quite plausible, they learned all of basic elementary school math within a few months at the age of 12 or 13. So if your child is ready to learn, they can learn a lot quickly. And when I hear stories like that, I always think, and so why were they forcing them to do things day in, day out before then? Often training them to hate math above all. I would say with the logic games and so forth, make it fun, make it interesting, and some of those can shift into math games. I would say this is one place where it is, if you're not mathematically adept yourself, it's probably worth getting a tutor, but the tutor is not somebody to teach them math. It's somebody who loves math games. And so they can transition them from logic games and programming to kind of playing with numbers. There's a wonderful organization in South Florida called IMAX that I used to work with when I did the Winston Academy. And they have some absolutely brilliant math games. They have an after-school math enrichment program. Their founder, Bert Kaufman, has taken many teams to the national math championships, state math championships, that sort of thing. So truly world-class math education. But one of their key approaches for elementary school age children is they've got very mathematically talented people teaching kids in these enrichment classes, these math games, thinking numerically, things like magic squares and how to recalculate them and so forth. This would be the single best investment if you want to spend some money, is to invest in somebody who can train your child to think mathematically and have fun at it. At some point, that person may want to teach your child the times tables, and that's fine. But at that point, the times tables is a tool for them to learn how to think mathematically so they can solve these problems more effectively. I think just like you can learn intelligence by means of lots of reading and writing, if you have somebody who's really adept at training mathematical thinking by means of these kind of math game-like interactions, you're way ahead of the game. So ideally, you've done a spectacular job training your child to read and write, and think, talk, speak, listen by the age of 12, 13. And ideally, you've done a lot of logic games and programming when they're young. And finally, maybe at the age of 6, 7, 8, you found them this really creative math tutor who can get them involved in translating their logical thinking to mathematical thinking by means of logic games transitioning into math games. And at that point, and I say 12 or 13 or something, because at some point students really crave a different environment. I'm going to shift and talk about the hormones a little bit. In traditional societies, at the age of 13 or so, they were considered, they had a rite of passage, and then they were often considered to be part of the adult community. Sometimes young men would have to go and hunt their first deer alone or something. The hormonal shift into adolescence really changes the kind of social desire. Obviously, they develop more of a sexual interest. There's a status, their relationship to status and hierarchy within the tribe, we'll call it, changes. I find they often develop a different kind of moral seriousness. Younger children can be morally serious, but as they hit adolescence, there's kind of a deeper resonance and more of a social dimension to their moral seriousness. So what you want is to get your child to an extraordinary foundation in reading and writing and math and confidence and initiative, so forth, by the age of adolescence. And then at that point, then it's time to really think about where you and your child are going to go with all of this. Every child is different. At the Cabelli Strong Incubator, I often describe our school as about 1/3 intensely academic, 1/3 intensely entrepreneurial, and another third kind of creatives. We're encouraging them to become, in some sense, creative professionals. I always say you can still be a poor, starving artist, but in today's economy, if you're a really talented creative, graphic designer, video producer, that sort of thing, there are a lot of interesting and often lucrative careers possible. So at that age, you might have a sense, and in addition to everything I've said, of course, you want your child to have been exposed to lots of rich experiences, travel, nature, camping, things like science and history should be fun, so never didactic, but they should have been reading and thinking and talking and going to museums. And again, you as adults are modeling, so if the parents are talking about ideas and this cool thing in science and that thing in the news, and you want to manifest the kind of fascination with the world that you want your child to have. So on top of the reading, writing, math, just immersed in the coolness of history and science and news with no heaviness around learning at all, you're going to have just a knock your socks off, totally amazing kid at 13. And it's time to begin to just think. No need to commit to one direction, but does it look more like your child is going to be, interested in serious academics and college? In some cases, your child will be totally clear. I've seen kids at 13 where they're an entrepreneur, no doubt about it. That's what they're going to do. In some cases, their creative drives are so overwhelming. Maybe they just draw all the time. Maybe they play music all the time. Maybe they're fascinated with video. Whatever it is that your child is really into, now you want to start being a little bit more destination focused in terms of customizing your child's education. So, if your child, and one way to look at this should be obvious, but you never know, is what does your child naturally gravitate to when they are left to discover things on their own? What do they do for fun? When I'm doing intake interviews for the Cabelli Strong Incubator, the most important, I ask a lot of questions about their relation to learning and so forth, but one of the most important questions is, what does your child do for fun? I like the idea of Taoism, where, I used to practice Tai Chi, where you go where things naturally flow. Why fight nature? So observe what your child loves. If your child has had a healthy environment and healthy peer relationships, you can see what your child does spontaneously, and it shouldn't be watching TV or just playing video games all the time. At that point, your child should be reading, thinking, talking, drawing, engineering, Legos, building things, programming. Of all the incredible creative opportunities you've exposed them to, some will most likely appeal more than others. It could be physical. There are kids that are natural athletes, and that's wonderful. That's their destiny. There's a book called The Soul's Code by a Jungian psychologist, James Hillman. I'll give you the link here. And that talks again about identifying your child's genius. You want to do that from the time they're young, but as they hit adolescence, it becomes more distinctive. So at that point, you want to think about mentors for your child's specific kind of genius. If they are an artist, maybe you want to devote more time to the art side. If they are a mathematician or programmer or scientist, you want to give them real development there. If they're a writer, get them a serious writing tutor. So at this point, you want to figure out what you're going to do in terms of minimal required for college, as it were, and what you're going to do in terms of helping your child's strengths make them absolutely the best possible being that they can be in their strengths. And I would focus first on the strengths, and then sort of see how you want to kind of broaden opportunities by means of, say, the college admissions option. So, for instance, if they are a brilliant creative type, if they want to go to certain kinds of art and design schools, typically the less prestigious ones, they don't need extremely high SAT scores. There's something called Full Sail University, which is a large for-profit university, South Florida. There, I've known people that have gone there. They've actually had positive things to say about it. I don't mean, I'm too surprised, but some for-profit universities have a negative reputation. But Full Sail University is not require a lot of academic demands. So as long as your child has high-level basic skills and a portfolio, and that's what they want to do, they will have that option. On the other hand, if your child wants to go to the Rhode Island School of Design, that's a very rigorous admissions process. So they need to develop themselves academically. They need to get the SAT scores up there. They should take a few AP courses, as well as have a spectacular portfolio. So I would say around even early adolescence, you want to start, based on your child's aptitudes and loves, exploring what kinds of options you want to prepare your child for, because you're going to want to know, is it important for that they pass a few AP courses? If so, they will need a certain level of academic rigor that may not be necessary if they're going to be an entrepreneur or a creative type. And if they do need that academic rigor, then you might need to start hiring real tutors or send them to a school that can provide them with that level of academic preparation. They'll have the foundation. It won't be a big deal. It might be a little bit of a transition if you put them into a conventional school right away. But that's the time to make a decision in terms of what kind of academic march and what kind of specific academic training is needed. The most alternative approach is, even if they're going to the Ivy League, you think that's an appropriate path for them, is crank up the SAT by reading, writing, math, they should be reading lots of very serious, difficult classic texts. They should be thinking, writing, talking about these texts. And again, St. John's great books coming out in me, but maybe they're scientific contemporary science instead of classic texts. That's okay. But in order to crank up their SAT verbal scores, very serious reading and writing. Mathematics, they should be working with a real serious mathematically talented tutor or taking a serious mathematics class to develop mathematical problem solving, so it'll show up well in the SAT. If they want the option to go to MIT, they should be on a path to be doing, at a minimum, AP calculus, if not much more advanced mathematics. Again, if you're not wasting time in school, you can take your child's loves and have your child go well beyond the standard. But you need to figure out what that is and how to build those strengths and how not to waste your child's time with irrelevant sorts of distractions like regular school. So finally, you've developed your child on this foundation, you've picked the strengths, you have the mentors. In addition to deciding whether you're going to do AP and SAT or not and at what level, then the big thing is helping your child do real-world projects. Going back to the notion that children in traditional cultures had this recognition of some level of adult responsibility in their communities, I think it's key to healthy adolescence that you give your child some level of real responsibility. Benjamin Franklin launched his professional career at the age of 12, 13 or so, as did Andrew Carnegie, John Muir, Thomas Edison. Back in the 18th and 19th centuries in the US and in much of the world, teenagers had pretty much adult level responsibilities and started their lives. One of the biggest flaws in our society is the infantilization of adolescence. I encourage young people at the age of 12 or 13 to look at real world-class excellence, writing, software, business, drama, music, whatever they are, and aspire to be a top performer. It can take them 10,000 hours or 4 years, whatever, but it's not about school. It's not about getting an A. It's not about getting 20 credits or whatever. It's, I believe in you. I love you. I think you're fantastic. Let's see what we can do with this talent you've got, and let's see how you can show the world what you're really capable of. So I see much of the time between age 13 and 18 not devoted to academics, but devoted to pursuing personal excellence in something a child loves, with a mentor who is skilled at the technical proficiency and also knows and loves the child. Do one more anecdote on that and then begin to wrap up. There's a book called Lessons from Extraordinary Educators, and it's about education professor who looked at a cheerleading team in Kentucky that always won the national championships, or a debate team in Texas that always won the state championships, that sort of thing. And he said, it's not the water. What are these coaches doing better? And in every case, he found coaches that were clearly cared about their children, the students who are working with them, clearly set very high standards. We're going to be the best, world-class, and we're not even going to ask whether we can do it. We are. And then finally, they had the technical proficiency to coach them there. Likewise, you want to select mentors for your child where that person loves and cares about your child. That person sets world-class standards, and that person knows how to coach your child toward world-class standards. So you've decided on the level of academic training, SAT and AP, built on the foundation you developed when the child is younger. You've identified your child's area or areas of interest. You have him or her working with a mentor who loves, sets world-class standards, and can develop proficiency. And you maintain healthiness, love, confidence for your child, and keep them away from negative influences. With all of that done, you will help launch your child to an extraordinary life. And, cost, tutors here, tutors there. If you can do most of this yourself, the less you can do yourself, the more the tutors. Again, if tutors alone, and you can't do it your own, if tutors cost too much, try to get together with other families and kind of create a co-op spontaneous school. I also help people start alternative schools. In some places, there are a lot of a la carte educational options that are kind of learning. So you say if you can't afford a math tutor, some places have math programs for homeschooling families where they'll just have great math classes. You want to be in control of things, and you pick and choose how to craft pieces given your lifestyle, given what you can afford, given your personal skills and talents. Craft all of this so that you can give your child truly extraordinary opportunities. I think that as we develop more options for parents, including tutors who think this way, including homeschool options, including alternative schools, including in some cases vouchers and educational savings accounts and tuition tax credits and diverse sort of policy approaches, I believe we can allow more and more families of all socioeconomic classes the opportunity to provide their children with truly spectacular educations so that we can bring the genius of every child to its greatest manifestation. And I would very much love to get as many people to that point as possible in the next few years and decades. So that's a long ramble. I was only going to go an hour, a little bit over an hour, but I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions or comments.
Yeah, very good. I like that. So just you have a different layout than everyone else. So I just wanted to tell you on the left of your screen, the third icon from the bottom, it says Crowdcast.
Yes.
Little yellow, red, and blue person. That will allow you to see the questions people are asking in the chat. The chat's in the top right, those two red bubbles.
Okay.
And the questions there at the bottom.
Great.
So yeah, if everyone wants to start posting their questions, we'll have Michael start answering them.
I just plugged into Crowdcast. I see, Will, you have a comment on music. I would say personally, music is the place where I'm least well developed, and so it's perhaps not an accident that I missed that piece. I think music is fabulous. I wish that I'd been more fully developed musically, and I do think haven't done a deep dive on the studies, but of course there have been many claims by credible people that music and mathematics are complementary. I certainly think that music is an important part of kind of mood and focus, and simply pleasure and happiness. I do think it's important to expose children to diverse genres of music. I also think with everything your child does, you want as much the child in the role of creator rather than just passive as much as possible. So I certainly wish that I had had more musical training when I was young. If children are simply addicted to music and addicted to one or two genres of music, I'm not sure that's necessary or optimal. But if music is part of this rich world of cool science, cool history, cool music, cool visual stimuli. If music is part of this rich, fabulous stimulus world of stimulating experiences you're giving your child, wonderful. And the more they can create, the better. That's just a quick riff from the music. Something else I didn't mention is mindfulness. And I do think the more you can set a tone on your own of mindfulness, and then also for your children, the better. But I see a question on homeschooling kids or sending them to a great school. And I would say it really depends on the options you've got. I think the great thing about a great school is community. I'm a great believer in the notion that we are the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. So, if I spend all my time with people at drink beer every day after school, or after work, go do that. If I spend my time with people, wake up at 7 in the morning to do yoga, I do that. Not that they're mutually exclusive, but we're all affected by social environment. And so with kids, if there's a really wonderful social environment where these kids are amazing and positive and the teachers are amazing and positive, I would say school would be better. If on the other hand, you have your doubts about the social environment, the human beings in that environment, but either the kids and or the adults, and you feel as if you can do a better job at home, then I would keep them at home. So it's very much I would say, just like you curate the resources your child's around, the kind of music, the kind of visuals, the kind of games, the kind of food, the kind of TV, whatever it is, you're going to curate the social environment as well. And you don't want your kids around bullies. You don't want your kids around teachers that are emotionally reactive. So wherever you can get the richest, healthiest, most stimulating environment for your child, either homeschooling or at a school. So structure rigidity on a day-to-day basis for the child. So the way I would talk about that is, Marie Montessori, I think the genius of Marie Montessori was the environment, the focusing on the environment. I would say, and there's some extreme cases, but if your child is a reader and writer, and they're reading and writing and creating every day, again, leaving math to the side, I don't think there is a need for some level of structure rigidity. If your child is inclined, I don't know if any child is inclined to stare off into space. A lot of the thing about the prepared environment is avoiding even having the things that are distracting. Often parents get into power struggles with their children if the child has already become addicted to electronics and the parent says, well, you can only play games or watch TV after you've done X. Okay, in which case you may have to require them to do X in order to play the games. But the ideal is very much to avoid the addiction in the first place. If they are already, that they really crave this stimuli, and it's, again, for whatever reason, part of the situation, in that case, I would say very much you can require a certain number of hours of reading and writing, but my hesitation about the requiring is it's all too easy becomes then it's unpleasant. So I would make it part of, this, we love this is important, we want you to love this because it's important. You can do a little bit of your games and video at this point, but during this period, absolutely none. We have to spend this many hours reading, writing, and doing math every day. The reason I left math for last is that many students on their own, more students will read on their own and write on their own than do math on their own. And so it may be necessary to have develop a habit of doing, say, half an hour of math every day, and maybe when they're older, an hour of math every day. Ideally, you have, again, a positive tutor who makes it fun, interesting, engaging. But the habit of doing something, just like playing violin, playing piano, just the habit of doing some every day is worth doing. So if you have a piece like that, I would make it as positive as possible, as minimal as possible, and continue to have the bulk of what they do be enjoyable. And the part where it is something that they're learning, something difficult, you can coach them on how valuable it is to develop the ability to learn how to do something that they don't initially like. Talk about your own experiences. So the $3,000 cost, that's an estimate for tutors, and it could be, so you could look at, depending on where you are, often there are, when I hire teachers, bright young college graduates and mid-career professionals. I've always found a lot of people, sometimes in their 40s, 50s, who are retired, they've made enough money, they're kind of semi-retired, maybe still doing their professional work part-time, but really well-educated, interesting people. And again, people coming out of college, ideally, or idealistic love it. So between those two populations, everywhere I've ever been, I find a lot of great people who are happy to serve as educators, either teachers in my alternative schools or tutors, for, say, something like 20 bucks an hour. And so 20 bucks an hour, 10 hours, $200, 100 hours, $2,000. So, 150 hours a year. With my kind of minimal math tutoring as the only external cost up to age 13, you can create a pretty modest budget, well below $3,000 a year if you're only hiring a math tutor up until age 13. And that gives you a higher budget for your child when they're in secondary, or 13 through 18. So really, you look at, in terms of the overall cost, look at what your goals, what your child is naturally inclined to do, where they'll need external resources, what you can provide as a family versus where you need external resources, and then kind of look at where you can get the most bang for your buck in terms of tutors. And maybe it's a writing tutor, maybe it's music, maybe it's mathematics, maybe they're a programming geek, you want to hire a programming tutor. At the $3,000 level, see how many hours of what kind of tutoring will give your child the most optimal experience. And if you can do most of it on your own when you're young, when the child is young, maybe then you can spend a lot more when your child is 13 to 18. So maybe it's zero if you're doing it all yourself until they're 13, and $6,000 a year, 13 through 18. So what are some things one can do as a parent to help develop one's children into voracious readers if they don't naturally become readers? That's a good question. Again, really important is you and your family being readers, modeling it, but there are still some children who don't become readers. There's some, I use a stereotype, often girls are much more verbal than boys, and there's some boys that are very much hands-on and do not like to sit down and read. Sometimes the boys can be just super active. Of course, some girls can as well, but more likely with boys. In that case, what I would say is, again, number one is you don't want them to hate reader. It might be necessary to spend more time reading with them. Also, audiobooks. If they're not naturally readers, do spend some time with them on a daily basis, reading with them. Maybe this is a place where you have to hire a tutor. In addition to that, you might have them listen to audiobooks and then discuss the audiobooks with them. Discuss the written books and discuss the audiobooks. So if your child is, say, one of those active boys who's not naturally a reader, say, let's do an hour of, let's sit down and read together if necessary. So we're actually translating prose, decoding prose. You want to keep that habit going. In addition, maybe you require him or her to listen to at least an hour, maybe 2 hours of audiobook every day, and then talk about the audiobooks. Even though they're not actually decoding visually, their minds are going to be learning how to follow complex narratives. When you ask them questions Socratically, you're getting them to think about the narratives. You are going to be developing fundamental verbal skills. And then when they get to this, I'll call it 13 age or so, you get a sense for where's the march to. If the march is to a demanding college, then it's time to sit down and say, if you want this option, maybe you want to study mechanical engineering at Carnegie Mellon, but you need excellent SAT critical reading and writing scores to get there. We're going to have to do some serious reading, some serious vocabulary development, a lot of writing. And so maybe, you need buy-in from the child at that point. And you say, let's start to really crank this up. I know you don't naturally like it, but you want to be this great engineer. This is what we're going to do. So, keep the structure as much as possible in the child phase, and kind of march to the finish line may require intensive work, basically. You could say, how many hours do we have between age 13 and age 18? Okay, given those hours, let's create a time budget. Within that time budget, how many hours you're going to read classic novels. You should be studying Greek and Latin roots. You should be looking up vocabulary, have a journal of personal vocabulary words. You should maybe continue to listen to audio novels. You're going to write so many words a day. You have tutors in reading and writing. At this point, probably be really helpful for the group Socratic discussions, because non-readers often still like to talk. And if they're talking about, Plato and Aristotle and Martin Buber and Toni Morrison and things, then they become more engaged with the difficult material. So if your child is not a natural reader, but you want to develop those verbal skills, you'll just have to be more proactive in terms of assignments and tutors and ultimately other activities. So Socratic method with homeschooling. Again, to back up, when from the child's young, whenever possible, try to ask questions about what your child is thinking and doing and talking. At a more formal basis, I do encourage, if you can get even a small group of, it's nice to have 6 or 7 kids, so have other family children come and to do group Socratic discussions. I like to pick interesting texts. My book goes into this in great depth, and ask questions about the text. Give you another example I actually did with a homeschooling family in Pennsylvania. We read with a group of 7, 8, 9, and 10-year-olds and this is about 6 homeschooled kids, huge age range, a paragraph from William James on habit. William James, 19th century philosopher and psychologist, really difficult prose. These kids, very young, but it was talking about, do we have emotional habits? And is courage an emotional habit? And we spent an hour going sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, and the children really got into engaging arguments about whether or not we have emotional habits, what an emotional habit might be, whether courage was an emotional habit or not, how we might develop courage. Those sorts of discussions develop children's reading. Again, you have your 8-year-old trying to figure out William James. They also really develop their sophistication and thought processes around important things. Junior Grade Books is a wonderful collection of reading materials for Socratic discussions. There's also something called Touchstones, which is another powerful set of readings, and you can buy Touchstones or Junior Grade Books and use them in a homeschooling curriculum. The reason some curricula are not great for Socratic is you want open-ended questions. You want texts, and it's something like, is courage a habit? We adults could talk about that. If a curriculum is very kind of narrow and didactic, if it's strictly factual without many interpretive questions, it's not very interesting or exciting to try to have a conversation about it. So I always, often an assignment I give children and adults to train them to lead Socratic discussions is I'll give them a paragraph and ask them to come up with as many discussable questions as they can on that paragraph. And a discussable question is not a factual right or wrong, yes or no question, and it's not a vocabulary question. The text that you select should be one where there are many different possible interpretations, many different ways to apply that text to one's own personal experience and one's own life. With rich, open-ended texts like that, you can get your child thinking a lot. So that would be my basic strategy for homeschooling Socratic. Pick interesting texts, get a small group of kids once a week, maybe several times a week, get them together and think and talk. And allow them to relate the text to their personal lives. That is what makes it interesting and dynamic. So we're kind of paused. Are there any, looks like I'm kind of caught up. Will, do you have anything else? We're going to wrap up pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean, we're out of time. I'm not sure if anyone else has any questions. That's everything that's posted. I really enjoyed your talk. I think I learned a lot from it personally. So yeah, I want to thank you for coming on. I actually, one more question I thought of for you is, what is your favorite book, if you have one?
That's interesting. Well, I'll cheat a little bit. As somebody who certainly loves the great books, I'll cheat twice. My short version of the great books are Plato and Shakespeare, 2 authors. Plato and Shakespeare both endlessly rich for me. And then I'll give a favorite book. I love Julian Jaynes' Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. I would say that did more to me than anything in terms of really shifting my mind. But I've got another question. Would you structure the topics over the years or just random? I would say pretty much just random. Voracious curiosity, rabid curiosity. I think the one thing that you should do is to make sure we all get in ruts. And so I would try to think as broadly and as diversely as possible. The world, one of my big complaints about schooling is, of the universe of interesting content, the universe that kids are exposed to via schooling is 1%. It's less than 1%. 3D printing. One of the things we have at our school is 3D printing, which is a whole new way of looking at how we can make things in the world. Schools don't do this. It's so cool. Very different example. Whenever I find bright, geeky boys, and sometimes girls, I ask, do you subscribe to popular science, popular mechanics? And most parents say no, never thought of it. Look at popular science, popular mechanics, amazing stuff going on. So in my experience, and I'll go to go back to why people think they need to structure it. When most of us go to college, we can take an anthropology course even though we've never had an anthropology course. We take a psych course, we've never had a psych course. We take an econ course, probably never had an econ course. For most of this, if we have high-level reading and writing skills in the humanities, we can take any course. If we have high-level mathematics courses, mathematics knowledge, we can take any math course, any statistics course, any computer science course. There are some sequential sorts of things. Math tends to be very, very sequential, but if you have very high-level skills, you can jump in. Give you a concrete example. The gifted programs, say Johns Hopkins Center for Talented Youth and the Duke Gifted and Talented program, they have been having gifted students take advanced placement college courses at the age of 13 with no previous prerequisites. So they have, and we did this at the Winston Academy, we have 6th, 7th, and 8th graders taking AP Biology or AP Chemistry. These are college level classes, even though they've never had even a high school biology or chemistry classes. They've never been exposed to the periodic table. But if you're a bright, capable student, you just jump in and learn. One of the things I love about entrepreneurs is entrepreneurs just jump in and learn. So in my experience, once you develop the ability, so I have huge respect for very high skill levels. Again, I put kids in front of reading and writing and mathematical materials that are way beyond their years. Develop them up to it. But again, by means of this intensive intellectual development, you can get kids to an extraordinary point. But once they have those skills, when in my school we do Plato and then Confucius and then Lao Tzu and then artificial intelligence and then primate biology, we're just all over the place. And part of it is you want your kids thinking about everything. And if I get in a rut, one of the things I love is to be exposed to people who are thinking about genres of literature or academic topics or intellectual things or personal development things that I don't know. Your child needs to be a magnificent learner. The 21st century change is happening more rapidly than has ever happened in the past. Your child needs to be able to absorb diverse information quickly. That's what will make them successful in the rapidly changing 21st century economy. So with that, I think we are out of time. Thank you, Will, so much for putting this together.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah.
And if anybody is interested in follow-up, I'm extremely passionate, so feel free to get in touch with me. You can find me at michael@cabellistrong.org. I'm also on Facebook. Feel free to befriend me on Facebook. And you can find me there through Will. So thanks, Will.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.